Hello and happy Friday, and thanks for tuning in to RadioFreeRhinecliff.org. And this show in particular, correct me if I'm Norm, I'm your host, Norm. I'm thrilled to be here tonight. Thrilled to be here tonight with Lowell Handler. Hi, Lowell.
Hello.
Thanks for coming in.
Sure.
I have really been enjoying reading your book, which is called Twitch and Shout, A Tourette's Tale. And also really enjoyed seeing your photos on your website, lowellhandler.com.
Thank you.
And I encourage anybody who's listening to, because you're probably listening on your computer, to go to lowellhandler.com and look at his photos because they're really gorgeous. So many really beautiful and engaging photos. And they all sort of have the stories. Most of the series have the stories that go along with them.
Yeah, they're under photo stories, yeah.
The photo stories are nuts. I'm trying to find my notes here. And
there are 9 of them that span 40 years on the website.
That's just amazing. And they're homeless in Poughkeepsie, deaf and blind couple, Dr. Orrin Palmer and Tourette's syndrome. And he was the doctor with the Tourette's?
Yes, he became a doctor. I followed him while he went through medical school with Tourette, severe Tourette, and became a psychiatrist. Today, he's a psychiatrist.
Wow, a psychiatrist. And East Village, I'm going to read the rest of the series. East Village, 79 to 99. Ethiopian Jews, which is an amazing story. Israel went to Ethiopia and airlifted, secretly, a whole group of Ethiopian Jews, brought them to Israel.
Yeah.
Which is I never heard that story. I mean,
well, that was, I think that was in 1991. And that was called Operation Solomon.
Okay.
And it was a secret mission until it was finally announced on national television just after it occurred, while it was occurring.
Right. And on your website, lowellhandler.com, there's a drop-down menu and people can go and see the photos.
Yes. And the film.
And the film, which was
made 20 some odd years later.
Right. Now, it's so, as I said, the website has all the stories, which really enriches the photographs, and some of them have videos. Do you still make videos?
I do. I consider myself a filmmaker now. I make documentary films, and I'm working on a new one right now that is taking all of my time, and I just hope that it gets done. And it's a docu-series about people with Tourette syndrome. Okay.
And in case the listeners haven't figured out by now, you have Tourette syndrome.
I do. Motherfucker. No, I'm just kidding. Listen, I'm just...
Listen,
I
like you. Have to remind me.
I'm just... Listen, we all have burdens to bear,
And well, but you referred to it a couple of times as a burden, a curse, and a blessing.
Yes, I refer to it as a curse and a blessing, both, because it's given me things and it's robbed me of things, both.
Okay, I want examples. What has it robbed you of? And also, I'm just thinking...
Well, I mean, just when I don't yet have the opportunity to tell somebody I have Tourette syndrome, and they just assume that I'm out of my mind or I'm a drug addict.
Right.
That happens all the time.
Huh.
But that's, to me, that's robbing me because it's robbing me of some kind of rich, social intercourse is interrupted by something that people are really taken aback by and have no idea what it is. Well, then I tell them, and then their whole face changes.
Right.
Their expression completely changed. Let me give you an example. I was in my accountant's office a couple of years ago with my wife, and I made incredibly loud pitch noise all of a sudden. The woman is not, I'm not touching her, I'm not next to her. She's like maybe 10 feet away from me, and she looks at me like she wants to fucking kill me. And she says, "Would you please stop making that noise?" And I said, "No." And then I paused, and her face was enraged. And I said, "I can't. I have Tourette syndrome." And her whole face changed, and she looked ashamed, and she said, "I'm sorry." I should have said, what are you sorry about? Sorry that I have Tourette syndrome, or sorry that you were such an asshole?
Well, I'm gonna just go out on a limb and say 90% of the time when people say sorry, it's because they're such an asshole. For me, I think the numbers are about like that. But that must happen.
But that happens
often.
it doesn't happen often. No,
No.
not anymore. It used to happen quite often. It used to happen every day when I was in my 20s and I was going to New Orleans. It happened, and when I was in New Orleans and I was 21, and my Tourette was so much more severe, the combination of that and the fact that nobody knew what the hell it was,
Right.
then it happened constantly. But
Right.
now it hardly ever happens, actually.
And-
Once in a while, when I'm in a very crowded public place, like in a big city, like New York or wherever, then it's, somebody will just like look at you like you're
But
you're out of your mind.
In New York City on a typical day, you're like interacting with thousands of people.
And everybody yells motherfucker there anyway.
Yeah.
I mean, you don't
And-
have to have Tourette to yell motherfucker.
Did you
in New
ever
York.
yell words?
Sure. Yell things.
And did you have a particular word that you yelled?
Oh my God!
It's internet radio.
All kinds of words.
We don't say anything
Not
racist,
just one
but everything
word.
else is
yeah.
forgiven.
Well, yeah. There's. I mean, I don't do that, but there are people who have Tourette who yell racial epithets.
Yeah, I know Red and
Sure.
Oliver Sacks, somebody who had it, and
But they don't mean
he's like,
that
I
they
can't
hate
say
those-
this,
Let me tell you something.
and
I'll
so he would
explain
say
how that works in the
nickels and dimes.
brain. Right, nickels, instead of saying the N word.
Yeah,
He's like, nickels
because
and
he
dimes.
felt it coming.
Well, let me tell
and
you
could-
something. People don't understand why you're yelling those words if you don't mean it. And this is the example that I give people. If you were walking down the street and you saw a 400-pound person, would you think to yourself, fatso, or fat, right? The word is in the culture
Right.
since you're like 2 years old. But if you had Tourette, you might not be able to stop yourself or inhibit yourself from blurting out the word fatso. And that doesn't mean you hate fat people. It just means that the neurotransmitter activity in your brain is a lack of inhibition, not
Right.
only of sound and of movement, but also of thought and stream of consciousness.
Right, but also it seems, I read some of Dr. Oliver Sacks's book on this. It seems that there's also a social element to it, and he talks about this Vietnamese guy living in San Francisco where few people understood the disease, no longer uttered Vietnamese expletives when a Tourette's guy who no longer
Right.
uttered Vietnamese expletives after moving to the U.S. from Vietnam. And
Right,
he
it's
said,
cross-cultural,
what would
yeah.
he said, what would be the point?
Would be the
And-
point, right?
And that question, well, he stopped blurting out, Vietnamese expletives, and said, well, what would be the point? That makes me wonder, like, well, so there's a social element?
What the
You
thing
want
is,
a reaction?
what
or
you're saying is the thing that you least want to say, the thing that you most not want to say. There was a woman I went out to lunch with once in New York, and her biggest fear was that her parents would find out she was gay. And what did she yell when she was home all the time was gay, is what she screamed every day, over and over.
And in different settings, would she yell
Yes,
different
we
things?
were sitting there having lunch. A guy with a ponytail walked into the restaurant, and she looks at me and she says, "Hippie, hippie." Two gay guys walk in,
Right.
and she says, "Faggot." A black guy walks in.
And so,
She said it.
the things that
I mean,
you were blurting, they would change based on where you are and
Based
who you were
on
with,
what the stimuli is around you,
and what the worst thing you can say in those
or what the
situations.
least acceptable, the thing that you most
Okay.
don't want to say, that's the most taboo, whatever it is.
In that situation.
Yeah.
Fascinating. And do you?
But does that resonate with you, the example I gave of a 400-pound person? You would think
it
that
does.
to yourself, but you wouldn't blurt it out.
Well, it's like when somebody says to you, "Whatever you do, don't ask them about their blue eyes." You
Right,
know?
whatever,
and,
and then you
and,
gotta
and then
be
that's all
staring
you
at
can
their
do.
eyes.
It's all you can think about.
Right.
It's like I want to ask about
Don't
the eyes.
say that word. I know, and then
Yeah.
it comes out.
So I'm wondering if there's
it's like that.
feels like that.
It is like that. Yeah.
But then you don't don't
just blurt it out.
successfully edit.
I talked to a guy the other day who's going to be in my new film, a docu-series about people with Tourette syndrome, and he's a retired postal worker in Canada. And he was in the office one time, and he was traumatized, he said, because all of a sudden it jumped out of his mouth. He was with a dark-skinned person, and he blurted out the N-word.
Oof.
And I think, from what he told me, it was just as traumatizing for him as it was for the woman who was with him, because he had no idea it was coming, and it just came out, and he got in trouble for it with the job, even though there's a name for that. It's called coprolalia, which is the medical term, which actually, interestingly, does exist in some other conditions. Coprolalia exists in some other mental illness conditions besides Tourette. But he blurted it out, and he got in trouble for it. And I said, did you explain to your employers the syndrome and the whole thing? He said, yes. But then at the end of their reprimand with him, they said, just don't let it happen again. And I'm saying, that's ridiculous. Of course it's going to happen again.
So for your symptoms, the things you were doing, you started doing as a young person, as a boy, did they initially think that they were sort of a psychological thing?
They thought it was something psychiatric. They took me to psychiatrists. They took me to head doctors, Norm.
Right.
They took me to head doctors.
Right. and
they couldn't find anything wrong.
and were you shaming yourself, thinking, "Oh, there's something wrong"?
I don't know what the hell it is. I don't
but
know what the
there,
hell.
It's a personality defect.
I knew there was
a character flaw.
I didn't know what it was. I knew there was something seriously wrong.
Right.
I didn't know what it was. I just thought my underwear was too tight.
Right, or something. Sounds really
something like that.
Sounds really uncomfortable.
Can that give you Tourette?
Too tight underwear? I don't know. I'll tell you in 10 minutes.
Is that why yours is too tight?
No,
you're going to start calling me mother MFer.
Yeah, I might. but that must have been very uncomfortable to think that there was something wrong with you that you could and should have taken care of.
I just had no idea.
Right.
I didn't find out what it was, that it had a name, and that there were hundreds of thousands of other people who have it, which actually was a relief in some way, until I was 24 years old.
That must have been an enormous relief.
Yeah.
When you're 24,
in some ways it was a relief. In other ways it wasn't, because they also told me that it was never going to go away. And I had hoped my whole life that eventually it would go away when I kind of became,
so
okay.
It's a good news, bad news sort of thing. So all of a sudden you're like, oh, thank God, I know what it is. But oh, fuck,
I'm gonna have
it's a life sentence.
I'm going to have it forever, yeah.
Huh.
So I had to accept that. And I had to just move on with my life.
And
at age 24.
Has age mellowed the manifestations of this?
Yes.
Just age?
Just getting older, yeah.
Right.
And I think also becoming more comfortable with oneself.
Right.
And also the fact that most people, not everybody, but most people know what it is.
Right.
And realize it.
And many people know of it because of the work of Dr. Oliver Sacks,
yes,
who's a neurologist and best-selling author.
Right.
I might have heard of it first when I read his book, The Man Who Mistook His Wife for a Hat. And
he also wrote Awakenings, which the movie is based on.
Right.
And in the movie, Robin Williams plays Oliver.
Okay.
And De Niro plays the patient.
And did the patient have Tourette's?
No, it was a totally different condition.
Okay.
But Robin Williams plays Oliver in the movie.
Right. Amazing. And he
introduced me to Oliver
did.
After the movie came out.
And how did you meet Oliver?
I met Oliver in 1986 when The Man Who Mistook His Wife for a Hat first became a bestseller.
Right.
And I read it, and I was amazed to see that there were 2 chapters in the book about people with Tourette syndrome. Or one chapter about a drummer, a musician with Tourette, called Witty Ticky Ray in the book.
Witty Ticky Ray.
And I read it and I was amazed. And at the time, we had phone books because it was before the internet.
Right.
And Oliver was listed in the Bronx where he lived. He lived on City Island off the coast of the Bronx.
Oh, nice.
And I looked up his number and I just called. Cold turkey. Just called.
You called him because you read these chapters
and
about people with
I
Tourette's.
called him up and he answered the phone. Because this is 1986. Not an assistant or an assistant's assistant.
Right.
He answered the phone and I said, you're the only one writing about it. And I had just finished photographing that story on the medical school student who became a doctor with Tourette for Life magazine. And I said, you're the only one writing about it, and I'm the only one photographing it. We should meet up. I said, I also have it. And that piqued his interest.
Yeah.
And then he said, okay. And we made an appointment in a couple of weeks. I drove from where I was living at the time, which was in Cold Spring, to his place on City Island. And I ended up doing that for once a week for, I think, a couple of years that we worked together.
Wow. So you like 28 at the time? Or how
I was, let's see, it was 1986, so I was 30.
Okay.
I was born in 56.
And so...
So it was the summer that I turned 30, yeah.
So, I mean, it must have been a dream for him to have you fall in his lap.
In some ways.
Yeah.
Or a nightmare. Depending on depending on what day it was.
Right.
But we lived together basically like in hotel rooms next to each other for a long time because we traveled all over the U.S., Canada, England, the Netherlands, and we stayed in hotels and we
Why
had
were you
rooms
traveling
right
together?
next door to each other. Because we were working together. Oliver said, I was his photographer, I was photographing everything, and he was writing about everything, and he wanted to do a book about Tourette, which never came about, but he wanted to do a whole book about it, and it was going to be kind of with me, the way that chapter is written that you read in his third posthumous book, because that piece was originally published in Life magazine in 1988, and it was about this little town in Canada called Lacrete, or Lacrette, how it's pronounced in French. And it's a town of Mennonites where a huge disproportionate percentage of this one family has Tourette and OCD. So they were genetically affected.
Right.
So we went to all kinds of places, in hospitals and medical centers and cities and towns. We went all over. We drove all over this country. We went to Canada, to that town, Lacrete. We went to London. We went to the Netherlands. We did all this stuff, and Oliver used to say that we were Tourettologists.
Tourettologists.
Just tell people that we're Tourettologists, like people studying Tourette syndrome.
Well, let's go back to this town, Lacrette or Lacrete or whatever.
Yes, the Mennonites.
In Alberta.
Northwest
in Canada.
corner. The northwest corner of the province
It's up
of
there.
Alberta.
Yeah. So how did that come onto the radar of you two?
Well, we found out that they were studying it. Part of the Tourette Syndrome Association had a study that they were doing with Dr. Roger Curlin, who is a neurologist and a researcher at University of Rochester, isn't it?
Right.
He was at University of Rochester in upstate New York, and they were studying the family and going there to this town,
because
which was incredibly difficult to get to.
Because somebody from that town had come to this guy.
Yes, the genetics is what
and said, "Oh yeah, everybody there has this." And he's like,
"Wait
"Wait a minute!"
Right, and he said, "This is like unbelievable." And when Oliver and I heard about it at a meeting in New York, we looked at each other immediately. And we said, we've got to go there.
Right.
And so what happened was I had been doing this piece on the doctor for Life magazine.
Right.
And it was finished. And me being an inexperienced magazine photographer, because it was my first magazine assignment, was working for Life magazine.
Not too shabby.
And I was like 20. I was just a couple of years out of college.
But that was like a dream job for a photographer.
Yes, just as a freelance
About
job.
as good as you could get.
And so they said, we're not going to run the story. After it was done and I was paid for it, after a year, and it was finished, they said, we're not going to run it because, there are more stories than we can possibly publish. And it's not, like, sexy enough or glamorous enough, like the cover that they did of Brooke Shield or whatever. So...
Yeah.
So anyway, when they found out I was working with Oliver, they immediately said, we need someone of his cachet to make sure the piece is published. We'll hire you to do a piece all over again with him doing the text and you doing the photos. And we said, we'll go to Le Crete and do it. And that's what we did.
And so I'm guessing you flew across country.
Yes.
Into Vancouver, or where'd you fly
into?
We
At that time, you had to fly from New York to Minneapolis and then fly from Minneapolis to Edmonton.
Oh, okay.
And then you had to go to the like a regional airport in Edmonton to fly into this place called High Level, which is a single landing strip. And then you had to drive a little more than an hour to the town of Le Crete. So by the time you got there,
And
you were traveling 14 hours. Or whatever.
right. And Oliver wrote about it and said, like, you got some crap ass car in the airport that had, like, the windshield was all shattered and stuff from pebbles on the road.
Right.
Which sort of gives you an idea of what kind of driving
it was like
that
a
is.
gravel road, yeah.
So you get to this town that you've heard about where a big percentage of the population has Tourette.
Mm.
And you unload the car. We're staying in, I'm guessing they had a hotel or motel or something.
Yeah, we were at the motel,
At the
Tourette motel.
And then you start meeting people.
Yeah.
And what was that like for you to meet so many others who
It was amazing,
had
but
the
there was
same
only
thing
a
you
couple
had?
of people who really had it very obviously. And the main person was David Jansen,
Okay.
who was the subject of that Life magazine piece that I photographed and Oliver wrote about. And he had a whole family there, but it was all his relatives had a lot of OCD stuff and, comorbid, they call it comorbid conditions.
Right.
But David had all of the outward signs. And in fact, we went back there in the early 90s when we did the film Twitch and Shout, the documentary film, PBS film Twitch and Shout, and filmed David at his home in Le Crete as part of the film.
Right. Wow. So and then you saw other people.
Yeah, there were other people
who had
that were
less,
like cousins, and
less
nieces
distinct
right.
tics, manifestations of this, and all of a sudden you're in a group of people who have this thing.
Yeah.
Did that feel good?
It did. It felt like a community.
Your community.
Well, it felt like a community, and it felt like total acceptance.
Right.
You know what it felt like? It felt like unconditional love.
Oh, I get tears in my eyes. That's so sweet.
Yeah.
So somebody, I guess it was Oliver, wrote about you in that chapter in his book, which is called
his third posthumous book,
called Everything in Its Place.
Yes,
There's a chapter called Travels with
left
Lowell.
3 books, almost completely written when he died. In 2015, he died. There were almost 3 books completely written, and that was his last and third posthumous book, which came out in 2019. But what's interesting is he talks about all kinds of things in that book. Darwin, all kinds of other
Right.
things.
But about Le Crete and you,
Yeah.
in particular, in Le Crete, he quotes you saying, "I felt the lure of New York," Lowell reflected after we left, "but I also felt the lure of spending a life with a family and friends in a place like Tourettesville." But I
That's
was-
what he named it,
Yeah.
Tourettesville.
Yeah.
And he wanted to call it that in Life magazine, and the editor told him that the word was too long for the page.
Oh, jeez. and doesn't hyphenate well. So did you have some feeling that a life there would be lovely?
Only in some kind of
Marry a nice Mennonite girl,
a nice
settle
Mennonite
down,
woman. Yeah.
raise some kids who also have Tourette.
No, my sister married an Amish guy. No, I'm just kidding. No. No, not. I mean, it was like a fantasy.
Right.
It was a fantasy. It wasn't a reality.
Right. And besides, I mean, it seems like it would have been very tough for somebody from New York
Yeah.
to go do that. Now, New York, just your photos of New York, let me
New
just
York
swerve
City.
to this, New York City,
The East Village
Yeah.
specifically.
are so gorgeous and fun. And again, everybody go to lowellhandler.com and listen or look at those while
Under
we're
photo
talking.
stories.
Under photo stories, yeah. And it says East Village, New York, 79 to 99. They're so good. And some of them are very evocative. And I wanted to ask, who were some of your influences for fine art
Photographers. Well,
or
certainly
journalists? Or
it comes from people like Eugene Smith and Bruce Davidson, Robert Frank. Louis Farr, as much lesser known, was a huge influence in some of the stuff that he did in the streets of New York in the 50s. And of course, my teacher and mentor was Lisette Modell, who was Deanne Arbus's teacher.
Okay.
And I met Lisette just about 5 years after Deanne Arbus died.
Okay.
And studied with her at the New School, and we became friends.
That's interesting.
During the last 7 years of her life. And she, of course, did a whole series on the Lower East Side of photographs. Lisette Modell, yeah. From the 1950s they were done.
And
so that I thought of this as almost like an extension of what she did with the Rolleiflex in the 1950s on the Lower East Side.
Right. Amazing. And some of your photos really remind me of Deanne Arbus. This one in particular.
Yeah.
I know. People at home. It's two guys sitting in chairs. And
they're both developmentally disabled people. And it was taken at an institution for them.
And this one kind of reminds me
East Village
of Vivian Mayer or Deanne Arbus. And they're just gorgeous black and white images.
That's how I started out, is shooting on film, black and white film. And I don't do that anymore. I mean, very rarely. Now I'm using all the digital stuff.
Right.
But once in a while I shoot black and white film just to do it.
Right. And can you shoot digital black and white?
Yes. You shoot the digital, and in Photoshop you can make it either black and white and color just by pressing a button.
Right. So do you ever shoot color and then import it onto your computer and then discard the color information?
Yes. I've done that, yeah.
And is that different than shooting black and white film? Or?
Yeah, it's different. It's somewhat different.
How so?
There's a different texture to it.
Right.
There's a different feel to it. But I love the digital stuff, and the quality is so good now. I'm shooting with a 50 megapixel camera.
Right. And so how does that compare to film?
It rivals the quality of film.
Okay.
It rivals the quality of film.
Any idea?
The digital stuff now.
Any idea like how to quantify that? If that's 50 megapixels,
well, I mean, the resolution of the picture rivals that of film.
Right.
Yeah.
Huh. And what kinds of things are you shooting now?
Well, I just shot the past 2 weekends. I just shot the Walk to End Alzheimer's for the Alzheimer's Association.
Nice.
In four different counties here: Dutchess, Putnam, Ulster, and Orange.
Right.
And I just got back in August. I shot a whole series that I'm working on in Missouri, which is also on my website in a different place. Under photography, if you look, there's a section called Missouri.
Yeah, I think I chose some of those
I've been
pics.
doing shooting since 1999. I've been photographing in this tiny town there of 500 people where my wife grew up.
Oh, wow.
Madison, Missouri.
Madison, Missouri.
Only they call it Missouri.
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 Yeah, my dad lived in Missouri. And
Which
he
town?
used to call it that, St. Joseph.
Oh, yeah.
Which he called St. Joe.
St. Joe, yeah.
St. Joe, Missouri.
Yeah.
I'm like, Pop, that's, it's Missouri. Everybody, he said, well, But, you grow up saying something a certain way. You sort of stick with it.
Right.
And so how did she get from Madison, Missouri to New York? And how did you all meet?
How did we meet?
Yeah.
Oh, my God. That's a crazy story.
Oh, good.
I was showing the film Twitch and Shout.
Okay.
It had just come out and was on PBS, and I was invited to show it at the Center for Documentary Studies, which is part of Duke University, at their auditorium there, the Griffin Auditorium, which is 500 people. And it was advertised, and it was a huge thing. And every seat was filled. It was sold out. There were 500 people. And I was really, like, pumped for going on stage and presenting the film. And they picked out a dozen people to have dinner with me before I went on stage. And Jane was covering it for the Durham Independent Weekly because she was a film critic.
Durham's at North Carolina?
Yeah, Durham Weekly, Independent Weekly. And I was showing the film at Duke. And she was there. She was covering it. And so she reviewed it. And she sat across from me. And the next morning, I was really lit, like not drunk or stoned. I was just lit, like because I was so pumped up because there were 500 people there and they had flown me down there and put me up, and it was like this big thing. And Jane wrote about it. And the next morning, I stayed at my parents' house because we're retired down there.
Okay.
So I stayed overnight there. The next morning, I come out, and my mother says, "Did you see what this columnist wrote about you?" And I said, "No." And so I looked at the article. And she said, "I didn't know what Handler's Tourette would be like because I never met anybody with it, but he kept Tourettically touching my arm, which I didn't mind because he's kind of gorgeous."
Oh.
And she put that in the newspaper.
Oh, my God. Did she put her phone number in there, too? It sounds like she's just about dead. So,
but what's really horrible about the story is, and was infuriated.
Right.
I didn't call her for a year and a half.
No.
Because I was living in Manhattan. I wasn't thinking about dating somebody in North Carolina.
Right.
I was living in Manhattan. I was dating other women. And I was like 40 or 41 or whatever I was. I was not thinking about that.
And how old was she at the time?
She was, I think I was 42 and she was 37. Because there's 6 years between. 36.
That's not a big
she
difference.
She was 36.
Right.
36.
Okay.
When we first met. And so I didn't call her for a year and a half. And then that book that you're looking at, Twitch and Shout, came out. And her editor says to her, "You had a crush on this guy. Why don't you call him in Manhattan and review the book?" So she did, and we ended up talking for an hour.
All right, what's the editor's name? Were they at your wedding?
The editor is Bob Moser, who was a friend.
Thank you, Bob Moser.
A close friend.
Because you all have been married 20 years now?
Yes.
Right.
21, yeah. And so she called me to review the book in Manhattan, where I was living, and we ended up talking for an hour. And I said, "I'm coming down there on a book tour in a couple of weeks." She said, "I know. I'm putting in the article." I said, "Could we have dinner?" So she said, "Sure." So that was our first date.
Wow.
And we long-distance dated for a year. We long-distance dated between Manhattan and Carborough, North Carolina. And then after a year of that, I would fly down there once a month, and she would fly up to New York once a month.
Right.
That's what we did. And then after a year of that, I said, "Why don't you move in with me in New York to my ramshackle, Coldwater, East Village apartment?"
And where was it?
She actually said yes.
Where was it in the East Village?
So on the corner of 6th Street and 2nd Avenue, directly across from what used to be the Fillmore East.
Okay. Wow. And was it
incredible
really
location.
A Coldwater apartment?
Pretty much. I mean, it was a rent-stabilized apartment.
But okay.
And my brother and I had gotten it in 1979 together. My brother and I got the apartment in 1979. My father got it for us. And it was like $400 a month. It was like a 3-room apartment. It was like $400 a month in 1979. And it was rent stabilized, so it only went up a little bit every 2 years. It was a 2-year lease.
Right, like 2% or 3% or... do you still have that place?
No, we gave it up to move here 6 months before 9/11. We gave it up.
Good timing. Good timing.
But I mean, it was okay. It was an amazing location, but it was infested with cockroaches and mice, and
probably everything. I mean,
Everything is.
the East Village in 1979 was horrible.
I know. It was all bombed out buildings and heroin addicts and
Yeah, and also
squatters living in buildings
in
for
New
free.
York City was bankrupt.
New York
right?
City was bankrupt because of the Big Mac bonds.
Right.
Koch was mayor.
President or Lindsay, I think, in 79, right?
That's right. That's
And the
right.
president
That's right.
told
I
Lindsay, a
forgot about
famous headline, like President to Lindsay, like fuck off or something.
Right, I remember that.
Headline words, not that.
But we moved in there, and, when my brother gave up the apartment many years later, I was getting a divorce from my first wife. He said, it's yours. We have the same name, the same last name legally. I took over the apartment.
Nice.
And I lived there until I got the job up here at Dutchess Community College.
Oh.
I got a job, so I moved out of the city.
And had you been teaching in New York City?
Yeah, I taught at the New School and at a School of Visual Arts. But I had been teaching for 10 years as an adjunct, part-time, at the New School in the photography department.
Okay.
Where there was a very well-known photographer who ran the department. So I taught there for 10 years part-time before I got the job at Dutchess. But I had also taught as an adjunct at Dutchess for 4 years ago, too.
While still living in the city?
No, while I was living in Cold Spring before
Okay.
that. Yeah.
And you also taught at a place for homeless women?
Yeah, a shelter, a homeless shelter.
Right.
For mentally ill homeless women, yeah.
You
And I wrote a
guys.
book about it, and I did a short video based on it called Crazy and Proud. That
Right.
came out in 2012. But it had been so many years since the publication of my first book that I couldn't find any publisher that was interested in Crazy and Proud, and it was such a hard sell. People were like, well, nobody really wants to read about, homeless mentally ill women in a shelter. And so I self-published it as an ebook, as an electronic book, with the 62 photographs and a full text and a short video that's like 6 minutes.
And it's photographs by you and by the women.
And also
who were,
by the women who were, I was
Right.
teaching them photography, and they took photographs. Yeah.
And people can find this on lowellhandler.com.
Yes.
Right. Which I asked that, which is where I found it.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and it's amazing, and so one of the things I loved was you were talking about teaching there, but also teaching at like SVA and the New School, and how the kids you were teaching at these colleges knew everything about photography, but nothing about life, and how the women at this shelter, how did you put it? The opposite, knew everything about life, but nothing about photography.
Yeah, and as a result, their pictures were much better than the 18 to 20-year-old students' photographs.
Right.
Even though they knew nothing about photography, they knew everything about life,
Right.
because half of them had been in jail, a lot of them had been prostitutes,
Right.
or crack addicts or whatever. And they were at the shelter, which was only a short-term stay. You could only stay there for like a year or a year and a half.
Mm-hmm.
No, not even. I think not even. I don't remember, but it was a certain number of months that you could stay there. So it was
Right.
transitional.
Right. What an amazing thing to teach art to
Well, I was
people.
a recreation specialist.
Okay.
So my job was to do recreation with them, and it wasn't only teaching photography or memoir writing. It was also taking them to movies, plays, opera, concerts, all kinds of events all over the city.
Right. How long did you do that for?
A year, full-time for a year.
Right.
Yeah.
So
After that, I just burned out on it. It was so difficult. I mean, it was really a very tough job.
right.
40 hours a week. They were all women from the streets. There was one day I remember, the worst time was one day when I had to get in between two 300-pound women wielding 2x4s
You gas.
at each other.
Oof.
And that was difficult.
Right. So I wanted to ask a question. It springs from that quote you said of the women knew everything about life, nothing about photography. At what point in your life do you think, if ever, your photography changed because you became a little bit more aware and understanding of the world around you?
That's a good question. I think it might have been before I found out I had Tourette.
Before you, there was a name attached
Before
to it.
that, I knew I had Tourette.
Okay. And would that have been in New Orleans?
In New Orleans, I think so, yeah. I think because the pictures, when I look at those pictures now that I took that year between 78 and 79, when I was 21 or 22 years old, they really kind of speak about street life and, all that. And they're kind of from that era of the 70s,
Right. Huh.
And I was living on my own in an apartment in the middle of the French Quarter, and I was like 21. I mean, it was. Can you imagine what the French Quarter of New Orleans was like in 1978 or 1979?
No.
I mean, it was unbelievable.
But
It was
also, it seems
unbelievable.
incredibly ballsy to pick up after a couple of years of college, which is, usually pretty comfortable.
I had 2 years of college.
Adventure.
And I dropped out. I was a college dropout.
Yeah.
I dropped out
you
to
packed
find
up,
myself.
You packed up a car. You said your dad loaned you his car or something.
He gave me the car.
Oh, he did?
The neighbor came down the hill and handed me a $20 bill.
I love that. I love that.
And said goodbye. And I said goodbye.
Oh,
And I
my
left
God.
With all my shit in the
And did
car.
your folks cry? Did they give you a
I
send-off?
cried. I remember crying as I drove away.
Dangerous driving and
Yeah.
crying at the same time. And you said in your book that you thought you were going to drive across the country.
I only got as far as New Orleans because I stopped there. I thought it was so incredible. And I got a job after a couple of days. I got my first job. The first night, I got a job washing dishes because the dishwasher didn't show up.
Right.
So the guy who owned the restaurant, who I since have become friends with and still know when I go back to New Orleans, still see.
I love that.
And his name was Tony Marino. He was an Italian. His parents were Italian immigrants, and he was a native New Orleanian. And he said, I was twitching like crazy.
Right.
And he said, come back tonight and wash dishes, and we'll see if we'll get you a job waiting on tables or doing something. But I have to have somebody wash dishes tonight. I washed dishes till midnight that night. I was really exhausted. And the money, I made $35 that night.
Wow.
I went across the street to the Cornstalk Hotel on Royal Street, and I paid that same $35 for a room
Wow.
for the night. And I started working at the restaurant. And then that's when I went to the Heads Inn for Weary Travelers, that flop house, for a couple of nights.
What's it called?
Heads Inn for Weary Travelers.
Heads in
The
for
Heads
weary
Inn
traveler.
for Weary
Do you have a
Travelers.
picture of that? I don't recall seeing a picture
I was
of
too
that.
afraid to take pictures there. It was too much.
Right.
But I slept it was just insane. It was just,
Right.
Yeah, it was just insane.
So you're working in a restaurant.
I worked in the restaurant. I worked at that restaurant for most of the year.
Just amazing. Did you work and then did you leave and work somewhere else in New Orleans?
I did.
before
I
you-
left, and then that restaurant closed. It went out
Okay.
of business, and I got a job at the Fairmont Hotel, working in the coffee shop there
Okay.
as a waiter because I had the experience. I had worked at the restaurant was called Trios because it had 3 different owners that started it, and they started me working as a waiter, so I learned that. And they actually trained me as a cook for a while, so I learned some of those great New Orleans recipes.
Oh, nice.
Some of them I still make now, once in a while.
Well, I'm always free for dinner. And what do you like to make? What New Orleans food
I
do you-
make some of the stuff that Tony, the owner, was the chef, was the cook. He wasn't even a chef; he was just an amateur cook. But
Right.
since he was Italian and New Orleanian, some of the dishes were like New Orleans dishes, like the jambalaya or the French dish, the trout meuniere.
Right.
But some of them were classic Italian dishes, like the pasta alfredo
Wow.
or something else.
And was it in the French Quarter?
It was
This
in the
restaurant?
French Quarter on Royal Street.
Okay.
Yeah.
Nice.
And I did that, and then I got a job at the Fairmont, and I stayed in New Orleans for a year before I left to come back to New York. The idea of coming back to New York was to finish college at School of Visual Arts, and also to find out what the hell was the matter with me, because I had no idea what it was. So I went to the hospital, and
had anybody ever sort of said, "Oh, maybe it's this or that," or?
People told me that I took too many drugs. People told me that I was nervous. People asked if it was my allergies. My mother thought it was my allergies.
Right.
Mom, how the fuck is that allergies?
Allergies.
Twitching like a maniac.
But that sounds like,
she was just in
classic denial. Yeah.
She was just in denial. Yeah.
So you come back to New York and with the thought like, I need to figure out what the fuck's going on with me.
What the fuck is wrong with me?
And what kinds of tics did you have at the time?
I had all kinds of head bobbing my head up and down. My arms would shoot out. My legs would shoot out. All kinds of physical manifestations, involuntary movements that are called tics.
Right. Let me ask you something. So you just demonstrated your head bobbing and your arm shooting out, your leg, which I assume is kind of what you did, like a fair representation of what you did. So now physically revisiting those tics, is there any sort of like resonance? Like, oh,
yeah,
right,
sure.
that
I
was.
still have all kinds of tics. I have all kinds of tics still, but they're just not as extreme or as exaggerated as they were, 40 years ago.
But when you demonstrate the head tic like that, is there some sort of like muscle memory that do you have a relationship to that, or it's just
like
I'm just
I'm just demonstrating.
Just demonstrating. Okay.
Yeah. But I mean, that's what I used to. But the tics also change and wax and wane over time. They come from one part of the body to a different part of the body. So you can have something and then have a different tic 2 years later that's in a different part of the body or something else. You can have it severely one day and you can have it very mildly the next day.
Amazing. Yeah. And you talk somewhere in this book, I think, about sort of the rhythm of Tourette's.
Yeah, the enigmatic tapestry.
Yeah. It's amazing. The book, Twitch and Shout, is so good. I only had enough time to read like 30 or 40 pages, and I can't wait to continue reading it. And many people I know around here have read it, and they were like, oh, really? Look for this chapter, look for that chapter.
Really?
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a whole chapter with Oliver in the book.
Oh, good.
So I wrote about him years before he wrote about me.
Right.
I wrote about Oliver, and he took it very well because the book came out in 1998, and there is, as the reviews at the time said, a warts and all portrayal of Dr. Sachs.
Well,
and I remember what he said to me after it came out and he read it.
Yeah. Well, the both of yous described your time together in Amsterdam.
Yes.
Right? He describes it in his book, Everything in Its Place, in the chapter Travels with Lowell. And you describe it in your book.
No, I described it in the New York Review of Books article.
Oh, right. The
that
article
came out in 2019. I published a piece, the last piece I published.
Which is after he'd passed away.
Oh, yeah, years after.
Okay.
Yeah. The last piece I published was in 2019 in the New York Review of Books, and it was about the night that Oliver and I spent in the red light district of Amsterdam, getting unbelievably stoned in every hash bar and drinking all night. And he stayed out all night and came back and knocked on my door at noon the next day.
Right, and in his telling, he was in bed by midnight. So,
well, that's not true.
So there's a 12-hour gap in Amsterdam.
Yeah.
And
he was out all night. He came in and was completely disheveled, totally disheveled. The next day,
was he smiling? At least
no. He was like, his glasses were like crooked. His pants were all twisted. Everything was completely disheveled. His hair was up in the air.
And did he share at all what kinds of adventures he'd gotten into?
He said that I had given him the last piece of hash that was left. He said he smoked the rest of it and wandered about the city the rest of the night.
Right.
That's what he said to me.
So y'all were smoking hash, and you mentioned earlier sort of like taking some drugs, or recreational drugs. Have you found any forms of self-medication like weed, hash, alcohol?
Well, pot. Yeah, pot.
Yeah?
Pot, yeah, pot is a tremendous relaxing substance, especially the indica pot. Rather than the sativa, is a tremendous relaxant for people with Tourette. It's being used now by Dr. Rudowski. Dr. Davinsky at the epilepsy clinic at NYU. Dr. Oren Davinsky is the neurologist who runs the epilepsy clinic at NYU Medical Center, and he was featured in Sanjay Gupta's Weed series on CNN that came out a couple of years ago. I don't know if you saw it.
I did
There was
not.
a whole series that Sanjay Gupta on CNN did on weed, and he visited the clinic and talked to Dr. Davinsky about it.
And so do you smoke every day?
I do. I smoke every day.
Do you smoke or do you have edibles or either?
I don't do the edibles much because it's a different kind of high.
Right.
It's a different kind of high. I smoke every day, though. Yeah.
And so do you pay a lot of attention? I know that it's not just indica or sativa. There's different sort of markers, different measurements of different
Well, I
bits
stick with the indica because I find the sativa makes me very hyper. It's like drinking too much coffee for me.
Right.
Have you ever been around a guy with Tourette who drank too much coffee? Do you know what that looks like?
No, I had coffee with you last week.
Well, but it's
that's,
not very
that's my
pretty.
only
It's
experience.
not very pretty.
Well, it was
There's a
beautiful
lot
day.
of swearing, throwing shit.
Yeah. You didn't do any of that in front of
No,
Samuels.
no.
When's the last time you did any stuff like that?
Like what?
Swearing and throwing shit.
Oh, well, I don't know. A few days ago.
Really?
Well,
And-
I say different things. I call people monkey fuckers a lot.
Monkey
I'll say
fuckers.
monkey
What a
fucker.
coincidence.
Like
so
a
do I,
monkey fucker.
mostly
You
when
just-
I'm driving.
Yeah, right.
No.
It's not only road rage, though. It can be just seeing, like, so-and-so's, and my wife is like, oh, I go, I don't know, say, like, Jesus fucking Christ. And my wife is Christian, So she says to me, why do you say that? Why don't you say fucking Moses
Fucking
or fucking
Buddha.
Abraham?
Yeah. When were you raised in the religion of Moses and Abraham?
Well, I mean, I'm a Hebrew. I'm a Jew.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Okay. And so
I'm the biggest Jew in New York State.
you are.
No,
Well,
that's not true. That's not
well,
true. There's
Mazel
a
tov.
guy in Buffalo who's 400 pounds.
Oh, yeah, well, you're not even close. What are you, like 190
Sorry.
or something?
No.
All
That's
right,
a
good.
Isn't that a horrible joke? Isn't that horrible? Jen said it. She's Jewish, and it's a horrible joke.
It could be so much worse.
Could
Right.
be so much worse.
And somebody, I think maybe it was Dr. Sachs who told you. And I
No,
love-
Oliver was Jewish,
was he? And so did you all bond on that as well?
Sure. Well, he was like the result of a Jewish aristocracy.
Oh,
Oliver. Sure.
He was
His mother was
English?
a surgeon. His mother was one of the first surgeons in the UK, who was a female. His father was a doctor, practicing up until age 92. His cousin was Abba Eban, the Israeli diplomat.
uh-huh.
Yeah.
Nice. So I was just about to ask, I think he said, Lowell, when someone asks, just say you're neuropsychologically different.
Yeah, that's what he said to tell people. I'm no, like they would really know what the hell I'm talking about. When somebody says, hey, what's the matter with you? I would say, I'm neuropsychologically different.
Right.
And that would, as if that,
That would
I said,
somehow
Oliver,
satisfy
as if
somebody.
that would explain it.
Right. And your dad said, and I loved this, upon learning about your diagnosis in 1980, son, neurological disorder is the wave of the future.
Yeah, that's what he said to me.
I love that.
He said it would be like that in the future. It would be like, what was that old TV series from decades, Buck Rogers or whatever?
Yeah.
People
In the
would have,
25th
very
century or
large
something.
heads and small bodies, and
Right.
everybody would have some kind of disorder, and they'd be riding in space vehicles and all this shit.
So did your father or mother or other relatives have some form of this?
No. I'm one of the only 1 or 2% of people who have it who don't have other relatives with it.
For
that
whom
are
it's not
known
genetic.
of. But actually, my cousin's son was just diagnosed at age 50-something with Tourette
Okay.
in Massachusetts.
So that
And
counts
I
as
also
close
have
family.
my first cousin's son is like 9 years old, I think, has Tourette. too.
And do you have any kids?
I don't have any kids, no. I have a dog.
And did you, was part of your decision not have kids based on the idea like, oh, I'm not sure I want to pass this on?
Yes, it was.
Like all of it?
A lot of it,
But you described it as a blessing and a curse.
yeah. But it was a big factor in that decision.
Right. Where do you think, or do you ever even consider this? I'm always like speculating about, other paths. How do you think you'd be different now? In what main ways if you didn't have this?
If I didn't have Tourette,
Yeah.
I would be totally different. I would be a totally different person.
Yeah, but
Because it's shaped to a large extent. It's shaped who I am.
Okay.
You know how people always say, I want to do this, but I don't want it to define me.
Right.
I think it does define me.
Okay. Yeah. You mentioned smoking the weed. Did you ever experiment with psychedelics like mushrooms,
Only
psilocybin?
40 some odd years ago,
Okay.
I experimented with psilocybin, the magic mushrooms. I took them, and it was incredible. It was unbelievable. I had an unbelievably positive experience. But the last time I did that was in 1983.
Okay.
So it was 40 years ago. But I had all kinds of visual hallucinations. I had colors and streaks and amazing things. But the person I was with the whole time told me that for 8 hours, when I was tripping, I had no Tourette symptoms. And that's when I had it really severely. So I had no Tourette symptoms, but the government stopped all that neurotransmitter research with psychedelics when they made them illegal decades ago.
So does it feel nice to not have any of those tics?
Yeah, sure. It would be nice not to have any tics. Yeah, it would be great.
Right. And
But
now,
as the woman who I interviewed in my book, in my memoir, said, be careful what you wish for. Because I asked all the people I interviewed the same question who have Tourette. If there were a magic pill to take it away, would you take it? And that's what she said. Paige was her name. She was a conductor who has Tourette.
this is in the documentary you're doing
in that
now.
book.
Oh,
Twitch
okay.
and Shout. She said, be careful what you wish for.
And so of the people you asked, what were their answers?
Well, that's what she said. That's what she said. Other people said, maybe, I don't know. Some people said yes, no.
And she said,
I
be
mean, the
careful
guy
what
in
you
the
wish
Twitch
for.
and Shout, the film, Shane, doesn't take any medication at all.
Right.
He just lets it fly as is, and he's got very... Oliver called the people that had really extreme Tourette, Oliver called super Touretters.
Okay.
You know what I call myself?
Can I guess?
A Tourette savant.
Oh, I love
I
that.
call myself a Tourette savant. Yeah.
That's good. And why? Why
I don't
Tourette
know,
savant?
just because I can.
Well, it's catchy. It's good.
What
It's
else am I going to
descriptive.
call myself?
Yeah. Well, there you go. And the documentary you're
Some
working...
guy with a twitch.
Some guy with the Twitch. Some guy with the book, Twitch and Shout, A Tourette's Tale, which I'm so thoroughly enjoying reading. I love your writing style. And, and it's a fascinating glimpse into somebody who's living with this, as you say, blessing and a curse.
And it has pictures, too.
That's good for me. And the type's big enough. Well, we are somehow out of time. It's been just about an hour. Lowell Handler, thank you so much for being here.
Sure.
Author of the book Twitch and Shout. Find it. Get it from the Morton Memorial Library after I return it.
Is that where you got it?
Yeah, I got it from the
Really?
library.
I had no idea they had it.
Yeah, they had it. They had the Oliver Sacks book too.
Oh, that's amazing.
Thank you for being here. Everybody have a great Friday and a fabulous weekend. Lowell, what a treat. I hope we can talk more in the
Thank
future.
you very much.
Thank you.